Hi, everybody. Nice to see lots of familiar faces. We've got lots of colleagues on the call, which is, I think, the first for me to kind of present to colleagues as well. Some of this is going to be relevant to them, and some of it might be a little bit boring, because the first thing I'm going to do is give you a kind of very quick potted history of social investment business and kind of where we've come from and what we do, because I think that helps kind of understand, you know, how we've ended up with kind of the recovery loan fund, and more specifically kind of flexible finance. You're not just hearing from me, like Salma said, you know, we've got Philip from Ubele, who's a kind of key strategic delivery partner on the front. So yeah, you're not just having to kind of listen to me drone on about the kind of the history of SIB. So SIB, we actually celebrate our 20th anniversary this year. We've been around for the last 20 years, and I've kind of been in my role for the last 15 of them. So been around social investment, obviously, for an awful long time, seen a kind of lot of changes. And when we started as the Adventure Capital Fund, which was £2 million, which seems like such a small amount of money now, which came from central government and which was designed to help work out how to create kind of sustainable community businesses through social investment. So we were one of the first, if not the first, social investors in the UK. And for those of you who don't know, what we do, we kind of deliver kind of loans and grants. And over the last 20 years, we've invested nearly £500 million, £500 million in the sector. The grant funds that we do, we're not like a traditional grant funder. We're then mainly aimed at helping organisations to become investment ready, because that's, you know, our area of expertise. But we have kind of diversified, and we manage grant funds that help organisations increase income from trading through the enterprise development programme. And a couple of years ago, we became the grant manager for Power Exchange, which obviously invests in kind of community business and supports community business. As well as the loans and grants, there's another pillar to what we do, which is our learning and influence team, which is something we've invested quite heavily in over the last few years. And the reason we do that, it kind of ties into our mission. But what we want to do is be able to shape the landscape, obviously, for, you know, for ourselves to be more effective, and for, you know, the organisations that we support to be more effective. So we do a lot of work now around data and impact and research and policy and kind of communications work, and Salma's part of that team. So everything that we do, I mean, we summed up quite succinctly, I think, like most missions can. We provide the money and support that, you know, organisations need directly, to enable them to do more stuff, to be more impactful. We work extensively, and certainly more extensively now, with partners, to kind of, again, to be more effective, obviously, for ourselves and kind of partners. And we also kind of use our knowledge and our experience of doing this for the last 20 years, you know, to kind of work and influence others. That's not to say that we have all the answers. We would never say that, but, you know, we do have a lot of experience, and by working with partners, we can kind of hopefully create, you know, better funding opportunities for organisations. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of SIB. And I think Philip's going to talk a little bit about Ubele now.
I'll unmute. Yeah, so I'll just jump in. So Ubele is a social enterprise. It's an African diaspora-led social enterprise working on a national, regional, but also local level, to support Black and racially minoritized communities, to enable them to become more resilient, and, you know, to enable them to thrive. So the organization was actually founded in 2014, following a series of conversations. Some of you may have heard of the founder or know the founder, Yvonne Field, who has been in the social and community space for like the last 40 years. And she has had experience in, you know, addressing social issues as a consultant, and working with local authority, working originally as a youth worker. And she set up the Ubele initiative to really initially look at what are the community assets that are needed for African diaspora communities into the future, And that has kind of developed into, where the Ubele initiative is now. And where that is basically, particularly during the pandemic, we've kind of stepped up and have been working with partners such as the lottery, particularly to deliver things like the Phoenix Fund that some of you may have heard of, which was a targeted grant program for Black and racially minoritized charities. And that was piloting what we're calling the Phoenix Way, which is like participatory grant making. And that is grant making in ways that basically includes the communities that you're trying to invest in, into the kind of decision-making model. And so this is, again, why we were particularly really interested in being involved in the Flexible Finance project, because it is that kind of, participatory, it's grants and loans, but, it's working with SIB and with ourselves as a kind of community-led organization. It's worth just briefly maybe saying there is another partner on the Flexible Finance program called Create Equity. Create Equity are not here on the call, but they are predominantly an arts organization which really work to make arts and social enterprise and the commercial industries more racially equitable. So Kevin Osborne, who's the founder of Create Equity, has been with us along the process. And I guess we'll get into more of the process maybe after Christian, if you're going to go into some of the nuts and bolts of what does the Recovery Loan Fund mean.
Brilliant, thanks, Philip. So I think obviously the most important thing to recognise about flexible finance, it isn't a standalone. It isn't a standalone product. It's almost like a bolt-on to a loan investment fund that we offer called the Recovery Loan Fund. So where the Recovery Loan Fund came from, when COVID hit in 2020, we've been working with British Business Bank for a while about being able to access obviously British Bank guarantees to help us obviously with our kind of lending names. So when COVID happened and they introduced the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, we were kind of well placed to kind of take part in that. So that's my long-winded way of saying in 2020, we launched the Resilience and Recovery Loan Fund, which we managed to kind of plan, design and launch in the space of about 8 weeks. And that was purely aimed at helping organisations obviously, impact and deal with, the impact of COVID. And through that fund, we distributed about 25 million of loan and grants into about 75 organisations. We all know that, the recovery from COVID, it's not complete. There's still organisations out there dealing with the impact of COVID and kind of building back from that. So we always recognise that follow-on funding was going to be required, which is where the Recovery Loan Fund came in. So what we did for this one, we used some of our own reserves. We went out to kind of market and, we raised some money from other investors. There's a social enterprise up in the Northwest who put some money in. The Church of England by the Archbishop's Council put some money in. Grant Making Trust put some money in. So as it stands at the minute, there's about £10 million worth of commitments with some follow-on commitments as well. And what that loan fund does, and it was originally launched purely as a loan fund, is to help organisations impacted by COVID. And what it provides is loans of between 100,000 and £1.5 million. They're repayable over a period of up to 6 years, and they can be used for any purpose, including the refinancing of existing borrowing. I don't want to go too far into kind of the technical details, interest rates, arrangements, fees and stuff like that, but all the kind of the information is on our website about the loan fund. The more interesting piece of the loan fund is the flexible finance piece. Now, the reason we kind of developed this, and Philip, if you want to kind of chip in at any point on that, feel free. It was long recognised, that Black and minoritized ethnicity-led charities and social enterprises kind of vastly underrepresented when it came to organisations either applying for or securing social investment. I think, anecdotally, it was well recognised and the data showed it. And that was kind of further strengthened by the release of the Adebowale Commission report, which highlighted structural barriers that these organisations face in accessing the finance they needed. I mentioned at the start, we have learned and influence team, and 20 years of doing this has given us access to an awful lot of data. And the analysis of our own data, we've got 4,000 organisations and a diversity dashboard also kind of evidenced, organisations of this type, they tend to be much smaller in size, and they've experienced systemic, exclusion from the social investment market. So it was recognised that it was a real need that organisations, of this type are missing out on securing the finance that they needed, and what we wanted to do. We wanted to do kind of something about that. Philip, do you want to maybe talk about how we kind of work together to kind of, before I talk about what flexible finance does and what it can offer, how we kind of designed the program and those that core design piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So we went through a process over a couple of months, actually, in, I guess, collaborating and looking at, what were the needs, what were the challenges facing Black and racially minoritized owned businesses, and what were the barriers keeping them from accessing loan finance. So some of them we looked at were perhaps the threshold was too high, of saying, okay, well, 200 grand as a loan is too much of a high threshold, or 100,000 was too much of a high threshold. We needed to reduce that down to make it more accessible and less scary, because there's the other factor of a lot of the organizations we're talking about are not used to taking loans, so they're not necessarily comfortable. Oh, I'm hearing a bit of...
Sorry.
Mute.
There we go. That's it. Done.
Perfect. Yeah. So there is this challenge around how do you get organizations who historically haven't believed that loan finance is for them? How do you encourage them to get access? And I think this thing around matching with grants is something that really came out of this co-design process, because with the whole loan plus grant, then the grant can also help the grant can help to de-risk the organization, and also act as really an incentive for organizations to participate. But yeah, the process was really an interesting one in kind of really looking in depth at what the potential challenges could be around people getting access to the funds, and then how do we, within the design of the program, create some solutions. And I guess the other thing about having community-led organizations like Ubele and Create Equity is that we also bring, I guess, access to our audiences as well. And so that was another, I think, really quite important element of the program, is that some of the applicants will be familiar with us as organizations, and then actually in a lot of the cases we are working as the direct relationship managers. But then, yeah, I guess, Christian, you'll come on to some of that now.
Yeah, I mean, just for anybody that hasn't kind of seen it, so I mean, specifically what the flexible finance product offers. So we kind of went out to Access, which is the foundation for social investment. We secured £2 million. So there's £2 million there of kind of grant and support, which, as again, it's not a standalone product. It has to sit alongside the Recovery Loan Fund. But what it can provide unrestricted grants alongside the loans, with up to 100% of the loan value, if that's needed. So a 50k loan can be matched by a 50k unrestricted grant. There's a program of bespoke business support, which again is something that's being provided obviously by Ubele and kind of create equity. And in a lot of cases, that can be just as important and just as useful as the actual money, because these guys are kind of experts in kind of what they do, and having access to those kind of networks and that level of support is obviously amazing. What Philip obviously mentioned before about a reduction in the criteria, for a non kind of Black and minoritized ethnically led charity, you have to have a minimum turnover of £400,000. And the minimum loan amount is 100,000. Essentially, we halved that. So for organisations, obviously, who do qualify, the turnover is £200,000. and the minimum loan's £50,000. Because again, because these organisations have been historically underinvested in, the turnovers tend to be lower. So if turnovers are lower, how do we get the investment of people who need it? We kind of reduce obviously that kind of turnover level. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a kind of package of support, grants, business support, and reduced eligibility criteria to try and reach more organisations. And again, I mean, Philip, you said there about using your networks. I go back to the point, we've been doing this a long time. We know a lot of stuff. We have a lot of data, but there's some things that we can't do, which is why we work with partners to kind of leverage in their skills, expertise, their networks, and really their reach. And it's something that we're and I know obviously our chief exec's very committed to doing, and we're doing more of it. To the point that we recently recruited a partnerships manager whose role is to kind of drive a lot of that, and she's been working obviously with Philip and Ubele and obviously the other people on the program extensively, and she would have been here to talk about all of this today, but unfortunately she had a prior commitment, which is why you've got me. Should we, yes. Philip, are you okay to just talk a little bit about how it kind of works in practice, and people referring in and stuff like that, and then I don't know, we can kind of open it out to questions between ourselves or the audience, really.
Sure. Just I think to touch on a couple more of the criteria, which I think is important, is that there's a maximum turnover there of 2 million as well. I'm not sure if you mentioned it, Christian, maybe I was, maybe I missed it. But I think the maximum turnover of 2 million is quite an important one to ensure that.
I didn't know that was there. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, so there's a maximum turnover, and also it is for organizations specifically who basically have not received repayable finance outside of the bounce back loan of more than 25K. So it's for organizations who don't historically have a track record of attracting lending, because not all Black and racially minoritized organizations are small in nature, and some of them are much larger and have turned over quite high amounts. So we do restrict that maximum turnover, and also ensure that it's for organizations who haven't received significant loan finance in the past. So in terms of how it really works in practice, I think it's a really very interesting and collaborative model, because what happens is, we get in the different applications or the initial expressions of interest. They come in through like a central portal, and then we'll discuss on a weekly basis. We'll meet and we'll look at who's coming in, and then different applications will be then referred to different partners. So yeah, for example, if there's an arts organization, we might well refer it to Create Equity, who are particularly arts and creative economy focused, and they might be the ones to take that forward. And then working in partnership with a SIB relationship manager as well. Then we'll work with those organizations to then, look at their finances, look at, their plans for what they would like to do with the investment, and then, decide if they meet the criteria. And the other good thing I think about this approach is that we're actually actively having conversations where, we might find people haven't quite exactly hit the 200K turnover. And so we might say to them, okay, well, look, you haven't quite hit this, but actually we just want to have a conversation. We want to understand more about your business. Let's find out if we can still work with you. So, even within we've got to have quite clear parameters for the program, but within that, we can still have room to have collaborations and to have a little bit of conversation and understand more about a business to see if we can still work with them if they are just outside of the stated criteria. So yeah, it's really collaborative, and we're constantly reviewing cases together and checking in. And I think the other interesting thing to note about the program is that there is approximately about £7,500 per funded organization of what I would call extra support. And that extra support could be used in any way that the organization needs. And so that could be, let's say, bringing in somebody to do cash flow forecasting for the next 2 to 3 years, somebody with specific expertise on finance or business planning, or it could be strategy. So they'll have a budget which is outside of the actual loan and the grant finance. There's an extra budget on top for them to deploy in a way that then really helps them to, I guess, to bridge whatever gaps that there might be. So sometimes it's also just a capacity gap, because often with small organizations, you're finding, there's very small leadership teams, often one person CEO, and then, whoever's the delivery team. So often the capacity issue is also a challenge. And so it's working with these organizations as well to get them through the application process, but ensuring as well that we've got a bit of resource to help them post receiving the investment and the grant as well. I hope that's makes sense.
Can I just add one more thing just before we kind of obviously open the discussion out? I said obviously we've got a real commitment to kind of learning and using data. I'll put a link in the chat. We have an RNS dashboard which is kind of updated on a daily basis, which shows kind of breakdown of investee applicants and obviously number of investees by type, and I'll put that up there. And I think what's and it doesn't include the flexible finance piece, but what's quite clear from some of the numbers is whatever we're doing seems to be working, because we are getting more applications from kind of the organizations that we are targeting. So that's a really kind of interesting little tool to look through, just to see the sort of organizations that are applying, the fields that they're working in, levels of turnover and stuff like that. So I'll put that in the chat for anybody who likes looking at data. And I'm sure there's some people out there who like doing it.
Okay. Sorry, did you want to also talk about kind of what happens next, like after the fund, and what kind of the future aspirations are of the partnership between Ubele and SIB, and kind of what your hopes are for next? Or if you don't know, you can say that too. Yeah.
I mean, I can talk a little bit about obviously the fund closing, because actually the fund technically it closes next Friday. So there's not a huge amount of time. The reason it closes this next Friday is because it is tied to a government loan guarantee scheme. So we can accept applications from next Friday, and we have up until, I think, till the end of June, obviously, to make decisions on it. So what I would say is, if there's anybody in your networks or you were thinking about applying, do it quickly. In all, we can't 100% say that it's going to be, continued on in some shape or form. But, I just go back to the point that there's been some sort of government loan guarantee scheme for the last nearly 40 years. So it's highly likely that it will continue in some way, shape or form. And if we have to kind of close the loan fund and come up with something else, I'm pretty sure there's a kind of commitment to do that. And I think the flexible finance piece will always, because we've got that money allocated now, the resources there. So I'm fairly sure it'll be around in some form or another, in the upcoming year.
Agreed. Absolutely. We're very committed to this approach as well. So yeah, we're keen to see this continue in future rounds. And we've actually recruited, well, we're in the process of recruiting in somebody who's really going to focus on this social investment piece and continue pushing this agenda.
Amazing, thank you. So should we open it up to questions from the audience now? I don't know if there's anything that anyone's reflected on that they want to kind of start and ask more about, or to find out more detail about, or anything like that. Just either unmute and go for it, or you can raise your hand. It's up to you completely. Whilst we're waiting, I can start off with one question. So just out of my own curiosity, I guess, you know, the £7,500 that you were talking about, I'd be really interested to know, like, for so far, how many people have actually taken on that £7,500? How useful have they found it? Do you think that has been a big game changer, especially for Black and minoritized-led entrepreneurs? Or, yeah, it would be really interesting to hear any more detail on that.
Yeah, sure. So it's available for every applicant. And so, you know, we are trying to get 20 organizations funded in this round. To be fair, I don't think we have yet completed any of the applications as yet. We haven't dispersed funds yet, but we need to get applications, I think, Christian, in before the 20th, right? But we can still disperse the funds after that, as long as the applications are in. So there's still, you know, there's still a bit of time for people to at least get in the first application, you know, in by the 20th of May, which is next Friday. So yeah, in terms of that, it is something we're actively having conversations about. And as I mentioned, this thing of capacity is kind of a bit of a challenge, because often people don't really have financial expertise within their teams that are outside of their accountant, and they'll only normally see their accountant when it's time to do annual accounts, you know, time to submit their reporting to Companies House. But then beyond that, they're not really having detailed conversations around cash flow forecasting going forward for like the next 24 months, 36 months. That's not something that people often have time to do, because, you know, with the nature of these organizations, it is kind of, I would call it all action. You know, I'm sure a lot of people here would be familiar with these kind of organizations, and maybe you've worked in them. And so, yeah, I think that the challenge can be is just, how do we support these organizations through the application process, but then, yeah, just make sure that they've got the support they need to ensure that they can continue to maintain the grants, maintain the loan payments, and, you know, effectively, I guess, execute on their plans.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question from Rana in the chat, and she said, thank you so much for sharing, really great to learn more about the fund. Can you talk more about your approach to managing and measuring impact?
I can do that. Yeah, we came up with well, not new, but we adopted a new kind of methodology for measuring impact a couple of years ago now, and I'll put the link up, because there's a whole kind of detailed guidance on our impact report. I think the most important thing is to say that it's not just a one-off thing for us. You know, we do an assessment. It forms a key part of, you know, when if we get an application, and we you know, as relationship managers, we do the assessment, then goes investment committee. One of the key documents in that is the impact that the organisation is delivering. So we do measure it at, you know, assessment stage, but, you know, we measure it, you know, at least annually. If there's ever a variation, and we're actually trying to, you know, kind of build it into our processes so that we do more of that. What we recognise, though, is we're not the experts in measuring the impact of kind of what organisations deliver. So we're less interested in, you know, you're delivering 1,000 interventions to, you know, 500 people, and that's resulting in X. The view we take is we measure what the organisation does. So we look at kind of its employment practices, we look at what happens with kind of profits and surpluses. What else do we look at? We look at, you know, kind of, do you work with local supply chains? Do you, you know, kind of have a good, you know, internal kind of training and retention policy? So, because I think the view is, if you're an organisation that's, you know, kind of well run and doing the good things as an organisation, invariably you're going to be, you know, the stuff that you do is going to be good and valued, whilst recognising, again, we can't, you know, we're a generalist funder, so we're not experts in measuring how well you deliver your childcare or your, you know, kind of debt counselling and stuff like that. But I'll put the, or Salma's already put it in. Thanks, Salma.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Rana, for that question. We have a question from Annabelle, and she said, I wondered, what did the participatory design process look like?
Yeah, I can speak a bit on that. So yeah, it really involved, well, I think we had like one really helpful kind of afternoon of like brainstorming and like using a framework, which I don't know if I've got it to share, but you know, it was basically looking at that customer journey of, you know, how do we engage people in the beginning? What does that look like? How do we support them through the application process? You know, what are the parameters and criteria? And yeah, just, you know, really trying to, I guess, remove potential barriers at every stage. And so I think often applications for like loans and stuff can be particularly quite cold, and it's just about the numbers. And if the computer says no, then, you know, that's it. And you don't really get to have a conversation with the human about it. And, you know, I think one of the interesting things that we did as well during the design process, or that we highlighted, was that there will be organizations who are, I would say, falling more significantly short of what the criteria is. And how do we still engage those organizations? Because they may be the ones who come back to us in a year's time. They may be the ones who come back to us in 12 months, 24 months, and they might be a lot more ready for investment. But if we don't engage them at this stage, we may never see them again. So, you know, that's something that we're actively, even now, still talking about, is like, what do we do with this pool of organizations who might be, let's say, turning over £50,000 or turning over like £100,000? You know, they are significantly short because, you know, the loan would probably make up too much of their turnover. You know, if you're turning over £50,000 and you're taking a £50,000 loan, that probably represents quite a significant risk. So for us, it's more about, like, even as we're in the program, is developing, well, how do we create something for this group that we can keep them engaged, we can have conversations with them, find out where they're at, where their challenges are at. And maybe there's a way we can invest into them, like even if it's like a day of consulting or strategy planning, or, you know, something that can help each of those individual businesses who are coming forward to actually, you know, make that jump to the point where they are ready to access, you know, meaningful social investment.
That's great. Any other questions from the audience? I was also going to ask if there are any questions that either of our speakers wanted to ask the audience. Like, do you have any questions that you want to share with everyone else, or like hear about their kind of experiences in running similar funds, or how they're kind of approaching the same challenge?
I think all those questions sound interesting. I'd love to know, because it seems like there's quite a few really interesting, well, a lot of really interesting people in the room. So yeah, I would love to hear how others are approaching lending in this space, if anyone is doing this, and what barriers they're finding that organizations are experiencing, or what people are presenting with, and what they're sharing in terms of the barriers they're facing to access social investment.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just before you kind of, very similar for me. I mean, you know, I know a lot of the other social investors, you know, some better than others, always really interested to understand how they design their funds, because, you know, some of the issues that, you know, we're trying in a very own small way to address, which is, you know, access to finance, you know, kind of, as I said, you know, well evidenced. You know, is anybody else? I'm not aware of anybody else ever having tried to have done this, but I could be totally wrong. You know, because there is a lot of investors out there. So just interested to know if anybody else has kind of tried to do something similar in the past, and what the learnings were.
Go for it, Lindsay.
Hi everyone, apologies for my camera being off, but it's a bit busy in my background, so I hope that's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to share a bit about a very small fund that we piloted at Social Investment Scotland over the last 12 months. It actually sounds quite similar in terms of approach. So we co-designed it alongside an organisation in Scotland called the Council for Ethnic Minority and Voluntary Organisations, CEMVO. And we worked very closely with their team they have a social enterprise team, so are obviously very well positioned, and they know a lot of the organisations that we were trying to reach. So we actually ran a couple of workshops with some of their enterprises that they already were working with, and asked them to help us co-design. And we went into that with a completely blank sheet, and we came out probably with quite a similar program that we offered. So we offered blended finance with match grant funding that was flexible to the level of application that was needed. We upped the minimum loan level or award level to £1,000 with a minimum award, and normally ours would start at 10. So we ran support programs alongside that. So the SEMVO team were giving support, and we created very flexible models where there were repayment holidays. And I think, if I remember correctly, we have charged an interest rate, but we're actually going to refund that at the end, because we recognise that it's a pilot and we didn't actually want to have any recompense, you know, out of it. We wanted to treat it as a proper pilot. So that will come, but it will be refunded at the end, the repayment of that interest when they repay the loans. It's really small. We made 4 awards in the end out of 6 applications, and we're still in the first year, so nobody's actually started repaying anything yet. So that'll be interesting when it kicks in. But I think for us as investors, the really key thing was that we reached audiences and communities that we would never have reached had we not taken this approach. It was just so inspiring to listen and to learn about communities that we didn't know about, and to be able to support them. It was, yeah, I actually found it quite an inspiring process and a really eye-opening and informative process. So we're hoping to be able to do more of that, but we're just kind of finishing off the evaluation and speaking to the investees themselves to get their feedback, and then we'll see what we do with it next.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. That was great. Did Christian and Philip, did you want to respond to that before we go to the next question? Or?
I think it sounds like it's a fantastic program, and I feel like there is that gap at that really, I would call it really kind of early stage, or kind of almost like pre-seed stage of investment, where it's like small amounts between, let's say, 1,000, as you said, up to 10,000, you know, as a loan, and blending that with a grant as well. I think is really, really innovative at that type of scale, and I think that's, you know, that's something that I feel you know, can help those organizations to grow in confidence, to understand they can get a loan, maintain it, pay the interest, test a new model, or, you know, test something around income generation. And then hopefully it moves them forward to the next stage. So yeah, that's really interesting. It'd be interesting to hear more about that later, and maybe see if there's some collaboration to be had.
Just very quickly, and kind of almost independent of the flexible finance piece, because, you know, the money that we have unfortunately can only be used for organisations in England. One of the other learnings from the resilience recovery loan fund is, you know, we only manage to make 1 investment in Scotland and 1 investment in Wales. So actually those turnover levels also apply to Scotland and Wales. So, you know, an organisation sitting in Scotland and turnover is only, you know, a couple of £100,000, then we can help in that instance, and the minimum loans 50,000. And very proud to say, at our last investment committee, I got an investment agreed for an organisation based up in Glasgow, which is BAME led as well. So yeah, so that was quite pleasing. It was just a shame we couldn't help them with the flexible finance piece, but at least we were able to get the investment to them.
Thank you. Thanks both for sharing. We have a question from Olivia saying, how did you go about determining the turnover criteria for applicants?
Quite simple. We used the last set of audited annual accounts, or last set of annual accounts. So yeah, it's an easy check against the last set of financial data. But what Philip mentioned before, if somebody's maybe kind of on the verge, so if, you know, if you're looking at for flexible finance and the minimum turnover is 200, but, you know, somebody's at, I don't know, like 170, 180, then, you know, we can have a conversation, because it could well be that, you know, turnover is, you know, they've got secure turnover of £200,000 this year. If it was much less than that, it's a harder, you know, eligibility clause to break. But it is an internal eligibility clause, you know, for the recovery loan fund. So yeah, we can have a conversation if it's somewhere approaching the minimum turnover level.
If there are any, John, do you want to go?
Hi there. Sorry, just to introduce myself, I'm John Harrison. I help to manage the Booster Fund for Power to Change Cooperatives UK. So we invest directly in community share offers, which is a kind of capital. So we don't deal with loans. It's a little bit different, but it's, you know, still dealing with community businesses. One thing that Philip said that I definitely empathise with in my role is that you mentioned that there's a lot of organisations that don't necessarily meet the criteria, but that you're still very keen to pass along and find support for. That's definitely one thing that there's a big priority for us, and that's a big, quite integral part of my role, and something that I'm going to be thinking about a lot deeper moving forwards. So I just thought I'd ask Philip if there's any sort of learning that you can share, if there's anything particular, any method in particular that you found was really effective at getting that sort of miscellaneous or more tailored support to these organisations from their applications.
Are you talking about in terms of those who didn't quite meet the criteria, or those who, to be honest, at this stage, we're kind of almost grouping these organizations and saying, look, we need to actually put something together for them. And it will be probably a bit more bespoke. So we aim to have conversations with each of them individually, find out what their needs are. And then from there, look at, well, can we design a day where we bring the groups together? Because sometimes there's also power in like this kind of having a cohort of organizations that are in a similar category to you in terms of turnover. They're aspirational in terms of what they want to achieve and the social mission that they have. And so, yeah, but you know, it's not something that we've fully designed yet, but it would be things like, you know, access to different sources of funding. You know, maybe we can send them to someone like yourself to see if they might qualify for some of your offerings. But yeah, you know, it's, you know, identifying sources of funding, it's getting them investment ready. How do we get them to start to understand, you know, different things around, you know, how can they generate revenue? You know, because we do fund charities as well who, you know, don't necessarily have revenue generation already built into their models, but how can they start to look into that and develop, you know, that side of things as well. So yeah, I think there's definitely a huge opportunity with that cohort to actually really do something that adds value. And maybe it's something we need to, like, you know, work with some other partners to put together an offering and to start signposting towards, you know, other stuff. So if there are people who know in the room who have ideas of where we can start to signpost people and, you know, where they might be able to get some extra support and resources, I'd love to know.
Over to Patricia.
Hi, just real quick. Kristen, you mentioned at the beginning of your session, your share, that you had been working with the British Business Bank. And I don't know in their entire involvement with this, but I've been involved in another strand of conversations, more on commercial funding by the bank, that they are unable to offer support to Black and Brown founders, businesses, you know, specifically. And I wonder if that was a hurdle that you had to encounter, and how did you get over it? Because obviously your fund is targeted at working with you know, diverse founders, and I just wanted to know what, you know, whether you were able to maneuver that.
Yeah, well, thankfully, I never had to deal with British Business Bank because we have a director of investments who took care of all of that. The British Business, obviously, the involvement of the British Business Bank is the fact we can kind of benefit from the Recovery Loan Fund guarantee, which it's as I understand it, it's quite a significant application process. It's basically what you're doing is British Business Bank underwrite 80% of any of your loan write-offs. So they don't guarantee it for the applicant. They obviously guarantee it for you as a lender. So if you lend somebody £100,000 and, you know, ultimately it goes bust and you follow all your credit controls, you can claim up to £80,000 of that back from British Business Bank. So that's obviously why it's so robust. It's, you know, the recovery loan fund's quite both products work together, the flexible finance and the recovery loan fund, but they are kind of separate products. So British Business, we've never had to involve them with the flexible finance piece because, you know, recovery loan fund is open to anybody. If you're a charity or social enterprise, it's open to you. I can really kind of understand and empathise why you would struggle trying to, you know, have a conversation around doing a guarantee or, you know, doing funding specifically for kind of, you know, the types of organisations where kind of targeting. So yeah, I don't think there's any easy answers there, Patricia. It's a difficult one.
Did you want to respond, or are you okay? If you can go on to the next question. So the next question is from Isla, and she said, "Can I ask what is the long-term outcomes of this kind of pilot/intervention? Will it lead to a change of culture approach with the more standard social investment available to make it more inclusive, or will ethnic minority-led social enterprises continue to need specific support to access social investment?" That's a good question. Thanks, Isla.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the hope is that this kind of program and this kind of approach will I think start to change the culture around you know, social investment into you know, I guess the more diverse communities of the UK who historically have not been accessing finance at the same rates. And so this is the thing that, you know, I really respect that SIB, you know, really understood this from their data and said, actually, you know what, we do need to do something which is a lot more targeted. And so I think once you have these examples of successfully, you know, businesses who have taken on social investment, used it successfully, they become case studies, they become then the advocates and the, you know, the people who go back out into their communities to then say, hey, actually we accessed social finance, and you know, we took a loan and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the end of the world. We paid it back and we used it to grow and we used it to develop our offerings. And I think, yeah, I think that's really what's needed, is, you know, more, I guess, advocates to receive cash and then use it effectively and go back out and then tell the stories and bring more people through the door. And then it gives the case studies for SIB and others to start to use, you know, to really help to evangelize, you know. And I think doing the kind of blended finance with the loan and grant, I think is a really important model that I think definitely that needs to be really explored in more depth. And I think definitely in terms of, you know, how we measure the impact for the organizations in terms of their sustainability in the next 3 to 5 years once they've paid off the loans, I think is going to be really, really important to see where those organizations are at. And, you know, looking at this approach, I think, you know, even in the next couple of years as something that we should be trying to scale up pretty aggressively.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for me, I think, you know, it would be wonderful if, you know, organizations of this kind of, you know, didn't need specific support. But, you know, the historic underfunding, it's not just underfunding from social investment. It could be that these organisations have, you know, kind of, I think they're underrepresented in grant funding as well. I mean, grant funding is not my speciality, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. They will be underfunded in terms of kind of securing contracts from local authorities or central government on income generation. So, but I think until those fundamental issues, you know, kind of addressed, and there's a bit more balance there between, you know, Black and minoritized, ethnically-led charities and, you know, kind of everybody else, there might always, you know, there might need to be some additional support because, you know, just by dint of, you know, just the history of these organizations, till you can lift them up to the same level and they've had the same opportunities, the same income generation opportunities as others, then yeah, there might need to be some sort of additional support. Is my gut feel.
Thank you both. Isla, did you want to respond? I know you're in a noisy office. Okay, cool. Okay, so I was just gonna, is there any other questions?
I saw a hand going up.
Oh.
Hi.
Who was it? Sorry. Oh, Cerise, hey. Do you want to unmute? Oh, you're still muted, Cerise.
Sorry, I'm not on form today, excuse me. So question to Philip and to Christian. So very, very interesting actually to hear not just from SIB's initiative, but also from the woman from Social Investment Scotland about the things they've done. I think we've known for quite a long time that there have been capacity issues with Black and minoritized ethnic communities for quite a while. And I was just wondering, given that we're getting more and more data from these programs that we're running, especially supportive programs, whether we're using our influence with the sector to say to big funders like National Lotteries Community Fund, government departments, because we have an influence department that said, whether we're using that to say to other funders, look, from everything we've done, we can see that this kind of program is needed, because we know that this section of the sector has real capacity needs. And why is it that most loan programs or other programs cannot have this kind of attachment with them? Sorry, a bit long-winded there.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important challenge in terms of, how do we look at the sector and try to encourage these type of targeted approaches. And I think during COVID, particularly after there was the data coming out around disproportionate impact of COVID in terms of the death rates on Black and racially minoritized communities in the UK, and then the issues around the death of George Floyd, or the murder of George Floyd in America, and the kind of racial inequalities that kind of brought to the surface of I guess the structural inequalities are always there, although we have a government who denies any structural racism in the UK, but it's there when you look at all the data. When you look at the data points, it tells you that. And so, I think funders like the National Lottery, who we are working with actually on this Phoenix Way approach, although there's been significant challenges and significant discomfort. I don't know if anyone from National Lottery is in here, but I think I'm allowed to say that there's been very significant discomfort on their side in actually being able to feel comfortable. I won't say completely devolving decision-making, but actually doing like more collaborative and, partnership grant-making and decision-making around grants. And I think that has been a challenge with them. And I'm not sure, maybe it's not for this forum, but, I think there are some underlying issues around why they feel discomfort around this. But I feel like, this kind of model that we've piloted here could be something we can, go back to lottery and to a broad range of funders and say, hey, actually, we should all be trying to look at and feel comfortable actually targeting, underserved communities within the UK, because that's when we talk about level up agenda, we talk about, building back better, all these kind of things. This is about, really ensuring that people who have historically faced greater challenges and probably even, going into an economy which is in recession, interest rates are rising, cost of living is going up, inflation and petrol, energy prices, everything is kind of, I guess, moving against, I guess, ordinary people and people who may be less financially resilient. And so often those people who are less financially resilient are the Black and brown people in communities across the UK. So how do we target them and feel really comfortable targeting them and working with community partners to do it in a meaningful way?
Can I just come back and say, is that all right, Salma? I've been reading about Phoenix and some of the, discomfort around that. And there's bound to be, that discomfort probably is predictable, but in a way, it's some learning, isn't it? To try and find out what that is about and try and kind of.
Yeah, I wonder if the learning is, we need alternative types of endowments and alternative types of investment vehicles. Because, when you have these big institutions, these institutions are really tied to government and government agendas. And if the government is not prioritizing a certain agenda, then it's difficult for the lottery as an institution to really, go against what, what's coming down from government.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also just wanted to kind of add to that point of Philip, I don't know if you have any reflections on kind of the significance of SIB taking the step to work with the Ubele initiative as kind of a diaspora-led organisation to work on this model, because one thing that we work on in the Diversity Forum is the internal diversity of social investment organisations, and we know a lot of organisations aren't quite where they want to be. So in terms of the significance of that relationship and having your knowledge, your expertise, and also your representation in this fund, I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's a huge step. I think it's a really, really positive step, and definitely commend SIB and the team, and everybody we've worked with has been really, really open to listening, to trying to understand what the issues are, and then to understand, from their perspective, how can they still be able to manage risk? How can they still be able to make investments which are robust, but do it in a way which is a lot more inclusive and opening the doors to people who haven't historically been involved in social investment before. So yeah, I think this is a great collaboration, and I'm hoping it continues for many years to come.
Thank you, everyone. Does anybody have any closing remarks or anything they want to say before we end, hopefully on time?
Can I just very quickly add, I mean, I'll kind of stick my email address obviously in the comments now, but if anybody wants to talk about the fund, talk about kind of social investments in general, I mean, my role as social investment business is relationship manager, new business. So, if anybody wants to have a discussion about recovery loan fund, social investment in general, or anything else that we might offer, please kind of feel free to drop me an email, and we can have a chat.
I dropped something in the chat about the Phoenix funds that we were discussing, for anyone who hasn't heard of it before.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time. Thank you, especially to Philip and Christian, for sharing everything that you shared in this call. If you have any questions or anything, just email me afterwards. And yeah, have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.